Hello, everyone. Kind of an odd setup here today for a book review, but that's because I want to get this done. I've been reading this trilogy for the last 3 months. I read the last book about a month ago, and so I'm kind of trying to make sure I get my thoughts out there before too much time passes. But this has been one of the highlights of my reading this year, and really the experience of reading this trilogy has been one of the highlights of my time on BookTube so far here. And of course, this trilogy that I'm talking about is the Alchemy War series by Ian Tregillis. I was very, very much honored to be a part of the read along that Alan from the Library of Alexandria hosted of these books. And the reason why I hopped on this is not just does this deal with military fantasy, historical fantasy, and some really deep questions and issues of faith in this series, which is right up my alley, but also Alan is the only person I've ever heard talk about this series. If you go to Alan's channel and you sort videos by oldest, if you find his very first book haul, I think the video is even titled that, like my very first book haul. He got the mechanical like 4 years ago and was like, oh, I hope to read this soon. Well, maybe it wasn't exactly soon, but it finally happened. So we've been reading this trilogy, one book a month, for the first 3 months of this year. So we finished this up in let's see here, that would be March then that we finished this up. And it's almost the end of April. And we finally had our last discussion for the Liberation Book 3. And since it's fresh on my mind because of the discussion, using this setup, I just wanted to get my thoughts out here about this trilogy and just help talk about it more. Because even if you're a viewer of this channel, you might not have seen those discussions. Those discussions are pretty spoiler heavy. So I want to give you a spoiler-free pitch for the trilogy. I don't want to waste a lot of your time. I want to keep it pretty fast here, but basically tell you why you should consider checking this trilogy out, even if it's something that you've never heard of before, which likely you haven't. It's not the most popular thing out there. The brief pitch for this is that this is like a trilogy about the Protestant Catholic Reformation Wars. So think like the Three Musketeers is set sort of during that time period. So think that meets Blade Runner. So the brief pitch in terms of the premise of the series, though, is that sometime during the time of the Reformation, the Dutch Protestants developed mechanical men, android-type beings, clockwork androids that are called clackers. They began to use them as servants, as workmen, but probably most importantly to this story, they started to use them as weapons. And the weapon, the military clackers that they built, basically have the stamina and fighting strength of the Terminator. They're unstoppable, powerful fighting machines. And because of that, in the wars that these Protestants were having with the Catholics couldn't fight back. There was nothing that they could do. So the Catholics had to flee to America. They rebuilt the Vatican in America. I believe, if I remember correctly, the Pope relocates, and it's mainly led by the French there in America, and they set up basically a new version of all of their countries, but across the ocean. 400 years or so passed, depending on how you count it, and it's kind of been a Cold War, skirmishes back and forth. But it looks like the Protestants are finally encroaching in on the Catholic colonies in America again. War is going to break out, and it seems like that the Clacker forces are strong enough now, and the Protestant forces are strong enough now, that they're finally going to crush the Catholics in America once and for all. So that's kind of where the story picks up, is with that being the situation that's presented. The Clackers are kept in line using magical geisha, I think that's how it's pronounced, that compels them to obey human commands, human orders. They literally have no choice otherwise. Their physical body is forced to comply with the commands that human beings give them. But every once in a while, for mysterious and unknown reasons, a clacker will break from the geisha that controls them. They'll go rogue. They'll develop a sense of free will. They'll be able to do whatever they want, think for themselves, operate for themselves. These clackers are quickly hunted down by fellow clackers and by the Clockmakers Guild, which is the large Protestant organization that builds and designs the clackers and kind of maintains them, and they're destroyed. They call it executed. Our main character for most of the trilogy is a quacker named Jax, who is present for a very dramatic execution of a rogue quacker back in Europe. And the quacker's name is Adam. And right before he dies, right before he's executed, Adam shouts out a phrase that will change everything for Jax and for quackers in general. And the phrase is clockmakers lie. He says this in the secret quacker language, so none of the humans know that this has been declared. That there's something nefarious, there's something unknown going on behind how the clockmakers have been building the quackers and how things have been operating. And Jax must discover what this phrase means, and specifically what it means for him and for quackers in general, if he can achieve a sense of free will, if he can break free from the geisha that controls him. Meanwhile, the head spy master for the French is a woman named Berenice. And with the French armies quickly approaching what's called Marseille in the west, which is the French capital there, she's trying to avoid the annihilation of the last French holdout from the upcoming Dutch invasion. However, the last threads of her spy network over in Europe have been eliminated, and she must discover the secrets of what actually powers the quackers, what literally makes them tick, by capturing some quackers and experimenting on them. And things go disastrously, very much so, wrong for her. That's kind of the premise, the plot setup for it. A few observations just right off the head that are very interesting here. First is, it's kind of a well-known fantasy cliche that if you want a villain, if you want a big villain for your fantasy series, what do? You take the Catholic Church and you make it evil, especially if you're doing something religious themed. Ian Tregillis does something very interesting in this series, which is he almost does the flip of that, and that is the Catholics are by and large the sympathetic party. So he takes the Protestants, flips it, and makes them evil. So we'll get to that in a little bit more here. But that's very interesting, and anyway, there's more to talk about there. The setting here is very, very unique. When I talk about who would like this series, there's a couple of recommendations that come to mind. First is, this is published by Orbit, same people who publish Joe Abercrombie's books. There's a lot of moral grayness and moral ambiguity and tough moral questions that are similar to things that are brought up in Joe Abercrombie's First Law books, that I think there would be a lot of crossover there. I think a lot of people would like it. But to reference a couple of lesser known authors, fans of R. Scott Baker should check this out. This is not as violent or dark or nihilistic as R. Scott Baker can be, but a lot of those deep questions about religion and the power of belief, and especially questions of free will, which sort of lie at the heart of Baker's Prince of Nothing trilogy, are also at the heart of what Ian Tregillis is exploring here. Now, he's exploring it in both a alternate history and in a science fiction, a pseudo science fiction setting. So it's explored very differently, but R. Scott Baker fans should also check this out. And then also, I would say, fans of Tim Powers, once again, to go one more level of obscure here, Tim Powers is famous for writing secret history fantasy. So if you've read his stuff, and if you haven't, you absolutely should. But if you like very much grounded in history, but with a fantastical twist to it, which is kind of what Tim Powers is known for, then this is absolutely a trilogy that you should check out. Also, I'll say, just while we're pitching this, the audiobooks for these books are fantastic. They're very easy to get through, but the books themselves, each one runs right around 400 pages. Tregillis writes with a momentum and a speed that's easy to get to, but you never feel like he's just rushing through the story, but he also does not waste time. These are very trim books. They're very to the point. He values your time as a reader, very much so, and trusts that he can make things deep in terms of the text rather than wide. So a couple of points here, since we're going to talk about like reasons why I think you should read this trilogy, reasons why I think this deserves some more popularity. The setting here, and we've talked about this a bit, but it's very unique. It's historically inspired fantasy, but it also mixes in a lot of science fiction as well as some magical elements and alchemy. So one of the things that I really look for in book series and things that I really love, I do like straightforward fantasy, straightforward science fiction, but many of my favorite books out there that are genre novels are the ones that blend a whole bunch of things together. So take somebody like Gene Wolfe, where Book of the New Sun is both weird fiction, it's pulp fiction, it's science fiction, it's fantasy, it's also very much religious fiction. There's all these different things that Gene Wolfe combines together, and horror elements, eldritch horror, cosmic horror. There's a lot of that in there as well. And that all comes together in Book of the New Sun, and I love that. Tregillis does a similar thing here with the historically inspired fantasy, alternate history, and then the science fiction parts, and then the magical elements of this as well. All of these ideas come together and are perfectly executed within the setting. So you look at something like where you have themes that are explored within a story. And with a lot of fantasy, it's just sort of like, well, we'll pick a setting and then we'll start exploring the themes through them. This series would not work without the exact precise setting that Tregillis has created, which is the war between Protestants and Catholics. So one of the big things is, specifically, we're not just talking about Protestants in general, and I should be specific here. And here's where Tregillis gets a little bit cheeky. We're specifically talking about Calvinists. And if you know anything about denominational differences within Protestant Christianity, Calvinists especially have at the heart of their belief that, and once again, all the Calvinists are going to come, actually, no, okay, with varying levels of severity and nuance and how they would define this, but Calvinists, in a sense, do not believe that you have free will. They believe that people are either predestined by God, they are elected by God to eternal salvation or eternal damnation. You do not actually have free will in the sense that Catholics believe that you do. And in Catholicism, free will is critical. It is essential to the belief that you respond to God's gift of salvation of your own free will. So that's very important to Catholicism. So to juxtapose these two things, where the Calvinists control these clacker machines and say, no, they don't have free will. And in fact, we are going to compel them under alchemical, magical geisha to do our bidding. They're just machines. There's nothing to it. There's nothing more to it. They have, not only do they not have free will, but we are going to compel them to do our will. Makes a very interesting juxtaposition to the differences that the Catholics have in terms of their belief. So this is not just a difference of philosophy, but it's also a difference in the very religious beliefs that they have. So this sharp contrast between these two belief systems really is what drives these novels forward. And you can enjoy all of this, once again, without being a person of faith, without being a religious person. Tregillis gives you all the information you will need in order to understand this conflict. But if you know the history here, if you know the conflict here, if you know a little bit of, basic theology about what these different denominations believe, I think it'll enhance your reading journey. And don't worry, even if you are a Calvinist, I think there's plenty to enjoy here as well. So that big question, and then setting it in the heart of a Reformation conflict, to put it simply, was brilliant on Tregillis' part. So let's talk about a couple other things here. Like I said, the pacing is really sharp. The fact that Tregillis moves from one point to another without wasting time, it doesn't feel like he's rushing it. It's deliberately paced, but we also don't feel like he's just killing pages, like he's just spinning his tires. These books could easily have been 100 to 200 pages longer, and he keeps them trim. Is great. Let me see here. So, the other thing is, though, that these books maintain their quality over the course of the trilogy. So there's a lot of trilogies that you'll see where there's a drop-off, and that's not the case here. Now, book 3, for me, book 1 is my favorite, and then book 3 is the one that I gave 4 stars to instead of 5 stars, which book 1 and 2 I gave 5 stars to. But that's not really book 3's fault. It's just some of the things there do not resonate for me on an emotional level quite as much as book 1 did. Book 1 really is my favorite through and through, but the quality of each 3 books is excellent, and is maintained across the trilogy. Okay, what else? There's very, very unique action here. So a lot of this also could be classified as military or espionage fantasy. Like I said before, Berenice is kind of the master of spies here. So if you like, once again, to the R. Scott Baker fans, where there's a lot of like espionage spy stuff in Drusus, a Communes subplot in that series, you'll also have a lot of spying and espionage stuff in here as well. And the military stuff is good, very well thought out. The action in these books is jarring. Because so much about the novel, so much about the pacing seems very refined. We have these people, and often many of the main characters are members of the gentry, upper class. So there's a lot of very clean in terms of the presentation. And then when stuff hits the fan, it gets violent and can feel really shockingly dark compared to how non-violent so much of the rest of the book was. So obviously, by contrast, nothing in these books is darker than anything in the First Law, but the contrast there is definitely shocking as a reader. And the action here is unique. It's not just like sword versus sword, and now we're going to change it up. One of the guys has a spear. Like I said, we've got killer, Terminator, unstoppable fighting machine robots, and the sheer terror of one quacker. There's a scene in the first book where one quacker, a military quacker, gets free and kills 30 or 40 people before they're able to stop him. It just wreaks havoc. And so how do the Catholics fight back if they don't have access to this quacker technology? And the answer is they use chemistry weapons, which is bizarre and out of the box. And Tregillis really thought this through. I believe his his background is in science. So this is sort of his bread and butter. These epoxy guns and sprays and things like that to freeze quackers in place, or to coat them in epoxy so that they're not able to move. So they can't use bullets, they can't use swords against them. So they use chemistry to fight. We talked about the themes of this a little bit already. There was a lot of religious themes and questions that are being asked here. Questions of, if you take away, do quackers have free will? If you take away the geisha, do humans have free will at all? And we talked about that a bit with the Calvinist question there. If you take away all facades of free will in a human, are you still a human then? Okay, so do you become on the same level of a quacker if you don't even have that facade appearance of free will that humans usually present? Are you now less human than even a quacker is if that is removed? So specifically, that Calvinist Catholic argument is sort of at the heart of these philosophical questions that are being argued here. And then to touch on this, the spiritual stuff once more, I'll say that Tregillis pulls in biblical themes and allusions very well in these novels. Once again, it's not bashing you over the head, but if you're familiar with allusions to Adam, the book of Daniel, and also some elements of Jewish myth, like Lilith, there's a lot of things that you can gain from this trilogy. There's a lot of value that you can find here. There's a lot of things that you can pick out. Now, some of this you need to not take as a literal one for one. You need to look at it more in a symbolic sense. But there's also elements of Moses and the Exodus story that gets woven into here. So anyway, Tregillis thought through a lot of this very, very well and incorporates it well into it. And on that note of the religious stuff, the profanity in these books is quite fitting. Basically, all of the profanity is religiously themed, and Tregillis gets quite creative with how it's used. And also, like I said, the different factions at play in this novel, based on their religious beliefs, that deeply affects how they view the world and how they view quackers. So, excuse me. Overall, I love this trilogy a lot. I don't know that many people are going to pick this up just because it's not widespread. You don't hear tons of word of mouth. And so it's hard to convince people to read this when their to-read lists are already so long. But I would say you should give it a try. If you like fantasy books that ask big questions about faith and religion, and a lot of fantasy readers do, it's in a lot of books, but it's not, with some fantasy, it can be explored in a very shallow way. Tregillis doesn't. He really thinks these things through. He fleshes out his story well. These books are tight, they're to the point, and they're well written. So I hope more people check these out. Anyway, guys, hopefully this has been slightly coherent, but these have been kind of my overall thoughts, and I wanted to get an overall series overview recommendation for this before too much time has passed. Because, like I said, I read it early on in the year here, so I don't want too much time to pass. This trilogy has been a highlight of my reading year so far. Some really excellent stuff here, and it's criminally underrated for sure. I also forgot to mention, if you are a horror fan and you like, especially medieval or gothic horror, there's elements of that pop up in these books. Now, if you're not a horror fan, you probably won't notice it. But if you are a horror fan, whether it's plague stuff from Gothic novels, we've got a little bit of, there's a lot of Frankenstein, in these novels. There's also some, could say, mild exorcism elements that get pulled into one of the books, which I really liked quite a bit. So there's a lot to enjoy here. These are not straightforward fantasy novels. Tregillis does a lot more interesting stuff than just that. So yeah, guys, I recommend the Alchemy War series quite a bit. I would love to see even 5 or 10 more people in my group of friends read this. So anyway, that's my brief thoughts on this. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.